to the Why God Why podcast. We are here as a production of Browncroft Community Church, and we exist to explore the questions that you may not feel comfortable asking in church or to people in church. And so we're in a series right now called Why Do I Still Follow Jesus? And we're talking to friends who have been through very difficult things and are being honest and open about what they've been through. And people could look at and hear their story and think, why are they still following Jesus? And we're going to talk about why they are. So I'm excited to be here with my friends. All three of them are my friends, and I'm looking forward to the conversation. But we'll start with this man right here, who's my friend Gage Hunt.
Hi.
Who's co-hosting with me for the first time.
Yeah, that's true.
I know.
And this is Amanda D'Angelo. I'm not sure you mentioned your name.
I didn't. I am Amanda D'Angelo.
But thank you. Yeah, glad to be here with you, and very excited to welcome our friends Paul and Jacqui. Mm-hmm. Like you said, we've all become good friends. Some of us for longer than others, but really appreciate each other and excited to have you guys here today. By way of introduction, Paul and Jacqui are married now 7 years. Mm-hmm. They have one beautiful biological daughter, Ezra, and a boy on the way.
Yeah, he's coming.
We're excited for that. They are they've been foster parents, and their vocational experiences too have been very outward oriented. Paul, for one, holds a master's degree in social work and has spent his whole vocational career working with students. He started as a nonprofit leader at a local community college, MCC, then worked with AmeriCorps for a time, serving at Hillside as a youth advocate for the past 6 years. Meanwhile, Jacqui has had a career in higher education, all of the past 10 years, working as an admissions counselor, resident director, assistant director of new student orientation, and now serves as the assistant director of marketing at RIT. She's also just completing, almost there, a master's in service leadership and innovation.
One more class.
Oh,
so close.
So close.
Oof. Prayers for that. Let me just add to that introduction that of all my friends, I have just hugely appreciated the way I've gotten to see both of you really two things. Honestly reckon, not pursue a half-baked spirituality, but honestly reckon with your faith and getting at not just what you've heard, but what substance is really there. And all the while, inside and outside the faith community, trying to care for and love neighbors well. I've so appreciated that about you too. So we are really happy to have you guys here with us today. Mm-hmm. Welcome.
Ditto. Thank you. We're happy to be here.
Yeah, those things are true about us.
And
humble
your
too.
humility, I am so grateful for.
Oh, man.
Also, thank you.
That's great. All right. Well, before we dive in to your season of struggle, which is what we're talking about today, why don't you guys both tell us about your faith before you even met, before you became Paul and Jacqui Stack?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I grew up in a Christian house, and I went to Browncroft since I was 5 years old. Many people know the Stack family. We had 7 children, and so we were loud and often lost people as we were leaving church. But yeah, loved being at this church. I was a youth group kid here, and faith started becoming important to me in about 7th grade. That was the first time it became something of personal ownership that I was passionate about. And that continued on through college. A lot of spiritual growth and bumps along the road in college. Had a big party phase, but ultimately kind of came back and owned faith in I think a more complete way. And then I moved on to becoming a campus minister with a national Christian college organization. And it was in that season when I was working that job that I met Jacqui and fell in love.
Quickly.
It was quick.
And yeah, I have a similar story. I grew up in a Christian home. We were very, very involved with church. Like, we were one of the first families to arrive at our church on Sundays. And the way that my dad would rally us in the morning as we would stop at Tim Hortons. I'd get the same like apple juice and a toasted bagel. And then, you know, I would set up while my dad was doing stuff for the board and ushering and all that stuff. And then my mom taught Sunday school. So grew up very, very involved with church, was on the worship team, did a lot with VBS. And I loved it. Like those were where my like closest friends were. We had like a girls' Bible study that I loved going to every single week. And then I ended up going to Elam Bible Institute for a year. Had no idea what I wanted to do with that. Just knew I was attracted to this place. I wanted to go. And then I transferred to Roberts Wesleyan College and finished my business degree there. And yeah, that's, I'm trying to think. So then I started working at Roberts, and that's when I met Paul. Wow. Was actually through his sister, Julia, who was also an admissions counselor at Roberts. And she was like, you have to date my brother. And I was like, no, I don't really want to be set up. And I was still, you know, I had just gotten out of a longer term relationship. And
then she saw me for the first time. No, that's not what happened.
So yeah, no like crisis of faith or anything like that prior to meeting Paul and getting married.
We are going to save that soundbite. No crisis of faith prior to meeting Paul.
Caption of this podcast. Oh man. So then you guys dated for how long?
Okay, yeah. So we were swift, okay? So we dated for 6 months. We were engaged for, dated for seven, engaged for 6 months.
Oh.
So we were fast. Yeah. And I remember even the morning of when Paul proposed that day, which was on my birthday, my mom had asked me like, do you know for sure, like, this is the guy? And I was like, I just know. Yeah. Like, yeah, he's the guy. I just feel like that is the right one for me. So, and I used to hate it when people told me that. I was like, oh, but
meaning asked you if you're sure.
No, like when people would say, you'll just know.
Oh.
And I'm like, no, there's got to be some logical things here. There's got to be some specifics. But with Paul, yeah, I think we just kind of, after a few months, we started talking about getting married pretty quickly. So,
wow.
Yeah. Did I miss anything?
No.
Okay.
And remind me, how old were you guys?
25.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, Jackie
2 months
turned
older.
25, and I proposed on the day she turned 25.
Okay.
She was a very young 25-year-old. We got engaged.
Just a few hours old.
That's right. Oh, man. So then we've talked about this ahead of time. That's engagement, and marriage is when the struggle started to happen. So we're going to get into it. Why don't you guys paint the picture of engagement leading into the first year or whatnot of marriage that was the tough parts?
Yeah, so engagement season was awful for me, not because of our relationship, but because it was my first kind of spiral into crazy anxiety and depression that I really didn't understand kind of why it was happening. So I was working for this Christian college ministry, but feeling really depressed and anxious about faith, feeling really kind of codependently and overly responsible for the spiritual lives of the students I was leading. I thought about work all the time and kind of constantly felt like a failure and like I wasn't measuring up to the spiritual bar God had for me. Sort of I was perpetually disappointing God. So this just kind of progressively got worse. And in the same time, part of how I'm thinking about this in relation to engagement was like, am I good enough? Like, am I going to have the courage, love, and stability to be a faithful husband? And a big part of me felt like, no, I'm not up to the task. And if I can't handle this part of my life, who am I to think that I can be a good husband? So that kind of the peak of that culminated to I was increasingly suicidal and thought life is too painful and hard, and I would rather end it. So one night I went to a bridge, and this is a bridge that I was literally kind of at the edge at, debating jumping off and ending my life. And then while I was there, I'd probably been there for about 10 minutes. A woman came up to me who 100% was sent by God. This was a person who was very trained for this moment. She was actually a social worker. She had a master's in social work degree, and she was a Christian. So she really knew how to talk to me with a lot of grace and patience, and sort of in real time talk to me away from the ledge. And then one of the coolest experiences of my life happened when this woman ended up becoming my supervisor when I was getting my master's in social work degree 4 years later. And prior to that, this was the only time I interacted with her, was on this bridge. So a miraculous intervention by God. So then that I ended up, after that happened, maybe a month or two later, I ended up quitting my campus ministry job. And this was also a really hard decision to make. So I had made a commitment that I would do this job for 5 years. So I really felt like I'm being a cowardly Christian. I'm quitting early on a commitment I've made. This is me backing out of a calling that God has on my life. So kind of the way I conceptualized this was, I'm not living out the faith that I should be living out. I'm quitting early on a really essential commitment. And that kind of further added to this sort of like mountain of shame I was feeling about myself, and continued to struggle with. I don't know if I will be a good husband or a good Christian since I'm doing this. So that was kind of the center of my heaviness in that season.
Wow. Thanks for being so vulnerable with us.
Yeah.
I really appreciate that. I want to ask questions to you, Paul, about that. And when I hear everything you said, I hear this like high expectation for yourself, that you have to be this for everyone and everything. Where does that come from for you?
Yeah. So a few different thoughts come to mind. And this was stuff that I kind of unearthed with a lot of therapy work. So part of going to therapy for me was kind of re-looking at some childhood pain and sort of things that sowed the seeds of codependency, where I felt overly responsible for people. Like when in this college ministry, I felt overly responsible for people's spiritual development, their health, their choices, to an extent where I felt like it was all on me, and that sort of set me up to feel like I was trying to hit an impossible or an impossibly high standard. So that was part of it. Another part of some of my early childhood pain, I think I struggled with seeing God as sort of like a harsh taskmaster who demanded that I follow faith perfectly, and that I see through all the commitments I've made and different things like that. And these were things, a lot of this happened within the relationship with my dad, a lot of tough pain points. And part of why I feel okay about saying this here is he and I have had a lot of restorative and healing conversations, and he has been incredibly gracious, loving, and consistent with me around this stuff. So he has helped me work through some of like our painful interactions when I was younger, work through how some of his anger towards different interactions we had affected me, and then sort of like debriefing some of those moments and releasing the unhealthy ways that I took that on as a kid. So I think that's some of the stuff that set up some of those feelings, especially the way that I related to God.
Absolutely. It is our parents have a tremendous effect on us with how we see God, which is unfortunate too sometimes, because our parents can have gone through very difficult things and are just doing the best that they can. So I love that you had that conversation with your dad, many conversations with your dad to heal that. Another question I have is, were you talking to anyone during that time? Like, did Jacqui know how you were feeling, your friends, your people you're working with? Did they know?
Well, and let me, if I can add to
go
that
for
as
it.
well.
Go for it.
As you respond, also, what do you feel changed, between, I guess, this role, this ministry role, and then being in it, where that switch really flipped from kind of feeling like, okay, competent, healthy, to kind of feeling like you're failing and you're letting God down and others down? What do you think contributed to that?
So I think some of it, there wasn't really a switch flipped. I think part of it was just there were seeds of things I was feeling when I started doing the job that really started to grow. So for example, let's say a kid started coming to Bible study and a few weeks later they stopped, and I would follow with them, have conversations, and I kind of kept conceptualizing it as this is on me. I need to figure out a way to make this happen, to get this kid in this room attending this Bible study as a demonstration of my, whatever, I guess, like spiritual competence for fulfilling this role. So I think those things were still present, but the weight of them and how much and how anxiously I thought about them definitely spiraled and swelled over the course of me doing this job. And as far as the question about
talking to anyone.
Yeah, talking to anyone. So kind of is wrong. Yes. There's a lot of people I talked to, and it was kind of across the spectrum. So there were some people I talked to that were very kind of gracious, empathetic, and understanding, and were present with me in that suffering. Amanda's husband was one of those people. Nick was a really great friend during that time. There were other people who really felt like my committing to this job, given that I had made this 5-year commitment, was really essential and important, and quitting would be a really kind of spiritually, I might want to say devastating decision, that they were concerned of how that would affect my life in the long run, and sort of had a lot of concern about that being a really bad choice for me. So I think some of that also kind of weighed on me heavily, as that kind of added to my, I feel like I can't do this job, but I also feel like I don't want to quit early on this thing that God has called me to. So that was another part of the tension I felt around the shame and the hesitancy to quit.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Oh.
Thanks. Mm-hmm. So Jacqui, meanwhile, bring us, what was next in your journey?
So I think while Paul was, because Paul didn't tell me right away when he had that episode on the bridge. I think it was about a week later.
It was the next day. We went to a wedding the next day.
It was the next day. It probably felt, yes, you are correct. And I still remember sitting in the car and him telling me this, and I'm like, oh my gosh. And without, I hadn't started recovery work or anything at this point. I hadn't dug into anything that I would later discover once we actually got married, and I kind of let my walls down a lot more with that. But, I had a lot of codependency. I was a very, very codependent person. So for me, I was like, wow, I have to be the strong one in this relationship. I have to take on all of the stress with wedding planning, with family, and figure out how do we get to the altar, basically. And then when it got to the point where we really started having those conversations, Paul was really doubtful of I don't think I'm ready to get married, and having to kind of navigate that whole conversation over and over again for the last probably 2 or 3 months that we were engaged. Again, like going back, we weren't engaged long, but for half our engagement, we were having that conversation over and over again. And as someone who suffers, later realizing that I suffer from abandonment issues, having some abandonment issues, since my dad had passed away when I was younger, that kind of all came to the surface, right? But I didn't have the time. I didn't make time to understand that and unpack it. So we ultimately decided to get married. And that came later. That's when everything started falling apart for me, you know, with my mental health, is when Paul started to go to counseling and started his recovery journey and started to feel better. And that's when I started getting a lot worse, because I think I was finally able to breathe a little bit and take up some more space. And I was so used to practicing being small, right? So that to give other people space, to feel the things that they needed to feel, to grieve the things they needed to grieve. And so that's really when mental health became like oh my gosh, I've never experienced this kind of hopelessness before, with depression and then also like suicidal ideation at that point too.
If you're comfortable, kind of keep going. Yeah.
Okay.
So tell us about that season then.
So we went through a lot of changes in our first year. Obviously, all the mental health stuff for both of us. We moved into, you know, we both didn't live together beforehand. So it was the first time living together, which comes up with anyone who's newly married or whatever. You learn, oh my gosh, it's the little things. It really is the little things that like, wow, why does this bother me and all of this stuff? So we're learning how to live together. We're learning how to communicate, even our time schedules. Like before, you don't have to worry about, oh, hey, when are you coming home? Hey, I was expecting you to come home an hour ago. You know, talking about schedules, like all of that stuff is brand new while we're also going through our own depressive like episodes. I also had changed my job. Paul had just gotten a new job as well. So I was a resident director, so very high stressful situations where I was dealing with crises on a daily basis with students. And yeah, I honestly just felt like I was a shell of a person. Like I didn't know, I had never experienced anything quite so like scary before. So, yeah, I had a lot of suicidal like ideation episodes pretty much on a daily basis for those first several months. And then it was actually getting a tax break that pushed me to like go to counseling. And counseling was never a part of like conversations in my family growing up or anything like that. So it felt scary. It felt new, you know, unknown. And I started going to see the therapist that Paul was starting to see. So it was really cool to like have common language at that point. Like, yes, we were seeing our therapists separately, but like to actually start to uncover a lot of the patterns and our childhood trauma stuff and experiences and not grieving certain things like my dad's death in the way that I should have. All of that was all new to me. So Paul and I actually started coming to celebrate recovery together at Browncroft. And it was weird. You know, the first time you go, you're like, what is recovery? Like, I'm not an addict, but, you know, is this a place for me? And I remember feeling just so safe and welcome and like, wow, this is like what the church should be like. People confessing sin to each other in a safe place, you know, working through the steps, acknowledging your fears around God, like all these things. It was just such a safe place. So that's when you know, you go around the circle and you share like why you're there. And I was like, honestly, I don't know why I'm here. I just feel depressed and I need something. So that's kind of like how we got started on our recovery journeys.
Wow. I was going to ask this and you already got to it, of the why that you started to feel all of this pain and the struggle, and the way that you articulated the struggles that you start to feel within marriage, especially feelings of abandonment. And you said something about feeling when you previously felt small and now you're like, I actually can express what I'm feeling and thinking, right? You can clean that up for sure. I've experienced that in marriage. My husband and I have only been married for a little over a year. And why do you think that happens? Why did that happen in marriage? Have you explored that at all? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and Paul can share too, but we've definitely talked about this. So we have read some John Bradshaw books. He talks a lot about family dynamics, your role in the family, a role that you play within your family in order to keep it functional. So even though it is dysfunctional, in order to keep your family kind of going, right? You kind of play this role. So we kind of have learned what roles we played in our families growing up. And when you don't have space to articulate certain emotions or things that you're struggling with, and now you're all of a sudden with this person that is your person, right? And you feel safe with this person, you start to have these expectations for them to reparent you in a way that you weren't parented growing up. And so recovery is all around you reparenting yourself, learning what are the things in my life that I need to seek healing on and own. But when we were first married, I was expecting that from Paul. Mm-hmm. I was expecting him to realize those things and to point those things out and to love me in the areas where I didn't receive that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a few things come to mind. One is part of what we read with Bradshaw and other therapists is this idea that for a lot of people, a switch flips when you get married, and all of a sudden, all of this, your unresolved emotional crap comes flying forth because there's a part of you deep down that's like, okay, I can breathe now and let out all this stuff that I've been sort of suppressing to behave well and sort of win this person over. Now I've won them over. So now I can get all of my needs met, all the things that I did not get that I needed as a kid. So that I think was both of our experience. So for me, one of the biggest switches for me was my wife in engagement was an all-star and I was a trash wedding planning partner. I didn't do anything. So like she was so consistent, stable, and not only practically helpful, but really emotionally available to me. And then once we got married and things became really internally hard all of a sudden for Jacqui, that was really hard for me. It was like I felt kind of blindsided by it. And there, like, the day-to-day dynamics changed. Like, for example, there would be days when I would come home and my wife was upset. So anyone who's been married, like, you feel the heat from your partner. Like, you don't know what you did, but you see them walking around and it's the way they put a water bottle down real hard or they like slam a drawer and they didn't say anything, but there's heat in the air. So it'd be stuff like that. And I'd be like, hey, what's up? And she's like, I'm fine. And so
True
like
story.
some of those things, like, like just kind of daily working through that stuff was really tough, especially when in a way it felt easier for me an engagement to kind of like get emotional connection from Jacqui. And then when her internal stuff was really difficult, that was harder. So that was one big thing for me. And on top of that, I think just all of when we were married, like the amount of decisions we had to make together increases. And I think when you have to make more decisions together, there's way more opportunity to take things personally. Like I'm mad that my wife won't care about the social plan as much as I do. And I'm upset that my wife doesn't want to spend money on this thing that I want to spend money on. So
or let me go out for as many bourbon nights with Gage as I want.
Every night.
Yeah. I mean, we did have a lot of how much money will we spend on booze fights. So that's not super far off from a few core fights. Yeah. That's I'll end it there.
Yeah.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. What I find, I think, striking and really relatable about both of your stories prior to meeting each other and then, being married, that I think we can all relate to regardless of being married or not, is we each grow up, no matter how awesome our home environment or how broken, with things that we kind of try to cover up or accommodate for, with dysfunction that we can make it by with in that circumstance, in that lifestyle stage of life. And then something changes and the spotlight is just shown on that. And that's exacerbated. For you, Paul, you said it started with the job, and then the relationship added. And then for Jacqui, it was really marriage that did that. And I think too, I love what you said about for those who are in serious relationships or married, the really sneaky, subtle assumption that, oh, if I have a spouse, they'll be able to help me through this or that. Like they'll pick up this slack that I have, which, God willing, there's some of that. And I think you guys are even testament to how you do grow into that to a degree. But a lot of people, I think, find, whether it's a spouse or a job or a new city or whatever it is, like that change of lifestyle, instead of being the solve for the ways they've been accommodating some dysfunction, it really exaggerates it, puts additional stress on it, brings it to light further. And that dysfunction's still there, or exposes the dysfunction that they didn't see before. And it's super cool too that you guys kind of responded to some of that, at least in similar ways, and even sharing the same counselor. And I think that's something for our listeners. A lot of folks I've spoken to sometimes see this conflict between the worlds of mental health and therapy, right, and Christian theology about wholeness and wellness. Would you guys share a little bit about your own maybe assumptions, preconceived notions about things like therapy and Celebrate Recovery, and then walking through that, how that's changed?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can go first. So I did not personally have a lot of hang-ups around my theology and therapy. There wasn't much in my Christian experience growing up that made me think things like I should really just be able to pray and enough prayer will solve this problem. One of the most formative books for me continues to be Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, and a cornerstone. I mean, it's on the front cover of the book, as it's impossible to be spiritually mature without being emotionally mature. So that caught on to that. I feel like I bought into that really early on. The idea that if I want to grow in faith, but I am not resolving my codependency, if I am overly responsible for other people's issues, or if I believe that my spouse needs to be the one to change, and then my emotional hangups will go away, like those kind of that unhealthy emotional garbage that I brought into marriage. If I didn't fix those things, I would not grow spiritually. So I think that in hindsight, I see that's part of the huge reason why I needed to do therapy, is that I'd be a trash husband without working through those emotional hangups?
I'm trying to figure out how I want to answer this question, but I think for me, like, I just cared so much about perception. I cared so much about, you know, I struggled with perfectionism. Like, I remember one of my music teachers in high school, because I would cry if I didn't get every single note right during Solo Fest, which is crazy, right? But he had given me this quote about perfectionism, and it was in that moment where I was like, oh, people are noticing that I care so deeply about how I'm perceived and what I'm putting out there. And it made me embarrassed, I think, but I also didn't know how to change that about myself. And, you know, anyone who's looking or discovering or trying, you know, curious about what codependency is too, a lot of it is around, you know, you might have your own set of needs. Well, we all do. We all have our own set of needs, but we don't want to put that out there into the world because we don't want to burden people. We want to meet other people's needs because we want to be perceived as someone who cares about other people's needs. And it's this cyclical, you know, destructive way of thinking, because we all have needs. We all need to ask for what we need. We all need to process that stuff. So I think for me, starting counseling and CR was just a big step, even just starting, because it was acknowledging, okay, something's wrong. I feel hopeless on a daily basis. I'm having suicidal thoughts. I'm feeling depressed. And it was just acknowledging it was the hardest part, to be honest. Mm-hmm. Even on the intake form for counseling, it said, like, have you had any suicidal thoughts? And I put no. And it wasn't until several sessions in with my therapist that I was finally able to acknowledge, like, actually, I lied. I am struggling with this. And she was like, yeah, I'm not surprised, you know, because we had already dug into, like, that, into some of my codependency and where that was a hang up.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah. While we're on the topic of Celebrate Recovery, how do you feel that it changed your perception of who God is?
So, Celebrate Recovery has been such a gift for me, because it's been such a healing place where people can just come as they are and process what they need to process and own what they need to own. And if people aren't familiar with the format, you can't say anything in return. Like, it's about listening to people. It's not about giving them book referrals, giving them Bible verses or advice. Yeah, it's you are there owning your stuff. If there's a conflict in a relationship that you're dealing with, like, focus on your own thoughts and feelings. Don't focus on that person that's hurt, you know, on trying to get someone else to own that, but just what you can control. And so for me, I think that really impacted kind of where I was at with my relationship with God, because I was questioning if I was still a Christian or not. So I was still coming to recovery, you know, Celebrate Recovery. I was still going to counseling, but I was like, okay, I feel completely like, I feel like I've heard God in the past. I feel like I've always sensed his presence. Right now, I don't. Like, I don't feel anything. So is he even real? Like, you know, multiple nights of, like, sobbing on the bathroom floor, telling God to take my life, like Elisha. Like, I literally related so well to that story for that first year of marriage, because I felt like every night I was like, God, please just take my life. Like, I don't want to have to figure out how to do this and whatever. So for me, like, I think it impacted my relationship with God, because I was seeing other Christians who didn't have this mentality of everything needs to be perfect. Everything needs to be buttoned up. You don't need to be perceived in a certain way. You can just come as you are. And so I think, I think my relationship with God was able to be sustained through that because I had other Christians who were loving me the way that God's love actually is. Would you
unpack more of that? Particularly, so the love of others, the expectation, absent love of others, sustained you through that in your faith. But was there in that struggle and that questioning of, is this real? God, are you there? Tell us more about that stretch and I guess any moments that stand out as you reflect and think about where you are now.
So Paul had earlier mentioned emotionally healthy spirituality. We've just switched our Devos, but we've literally done that Devo every single morning together for like 5 years straight, right?
Most mornings.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
The day-by-day one?
I don't want people to think we're 100% successful. That is not true.
85%.
Solid
successful.
85.
Plug for that Devo.
Yeah. So Pete Scazzaro talks about, the author of Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, talks about coming to the wall. And I feel like it gave me words for what I was experiencing spiritually because I didn't really have those words, right? And the wall in those Devos is talking about, like, you're basically coming face to face with not just your sin, but like all these deepest fears that you have of God. And it's a crisis of faith. And it doesn't just happen once. It happens time and time again. But if you can push through the wall and, with God's help and a supportive network, it doesn't have to be celebrate recovery or whatever, but like that's where your spiritual maturity can blossom. So for me, like, if it wasn't for the women that I had in my step study at Celebrate Recovery, for Paul doing his own work in therapy, for me doing my own work in therapy, for us constantly communicating about our, experiences growing up and things like that and unpacking so many different things, I wouldn't have been able to push through the wall, right? That was not something I could have done by myself. So I'll just end it there.
That's good. It sounds like people who are real and loving towards you and stuff like EHS and walking through that content, at least one thing it did was normalized where you were, made it feel less fantastic or absurd and abnormal.
Yeah, absolutely.
So for me, thinking about the question about how did Celebrate Recovery change my view of God, I think a lot of it, a few things. One is I think it helped me in a sort of structured way have a really healthy experience of practicing faith. And it helped me move towards seeing God as someone who is rooting for me and is present with me as I'm working through some of my character defects. So to give a specific example that came to mind, this was either our first or second year of marriage. I think it was our second, but Jackie and I went to see this musical, Miss Saigon, and I was sitting in a different part of the theater because we were going with different people that had given us tickets. So there was, I don't know if for people who haven't seen this musical, there are very many scenes with a lot of women dancing, wearing very little clothes in a very sexualized way. So Jackie left at intermission for the show, and I did not. I stayed, and she was really hurt by me staying because she kind of felt like, why you're married to me? Why are you staying at this really hypersexualized show? So when I processed that with the mentor and at Celebrate Recovery, an unhealthy part of me who wants to put it on Jacqui is like, why are you making such a big deal out of this? It was just one show and other things like that. But I think the healthy Christian practice in that moment is, first of all, for me to confess, I stated something that was a lustful experience for me and that was not loving to my wife. So me staying was the wrong decision, and I need to own that, and I need to take responsibility for what I can here. So I'm not responsible for how my wife felt about it, but I am responsible for my decision to stay and how that hurt her. So processing that at Celebrate Recovery gave me a chance to confess that sin. And on top of that, the way that I would continually process that in prayer is reminding myself, like, God is not furiously condemning me for this decision. He's encouraging my ownership, and he's helping me walk through the reparative work with my wife, rooting for me all the time to continue to make progress in this area, rather than a harsh, demanding taskmaster who's like, you screwed up here, this was awful and bad, and sort of heaping shame on me.
Which goes back to what you said before about how you viewed God.
Yeah.
I mean, that just totally, to me, I wouldn't say totally, I guess, it heals that. Was that healing for you, Paul?
For sure. And there were so many other experiences I had in Celebrate Recovery, similarly, like realizing like one of my biggest character defects is resentment, like the kind of harboring bitterness and instances that are frustrating. So I would be at Celebrate Recovery, and I'll continue to use marriage as an example because that's what we've talked about, thinking about like, I'm really frustrated that like we wanted to go to this party together, and Jacqui at the last minute was like, I'm really kind of worn out, I don't want to go. And it could be easy for me to harbor resentment about that. And Celebrate Recovery is a place where I can name, I'm feeling frustrated, but God's invitation is not for me to cling to bitterness here, but sort of accept what am I trying to say? Accept my responsibility for what I need to. So I can own my attitude towards my wife. I can own anything I said to her that was unloving. I can own sharing with her my frustration and seeking sort of a constructive path forward. But the only way I get there is by owning my own sin and responsibility in the context of a community that is loving me, supporting me, that is reflecting God's love and support for me in the same way.
I mean, that is just the most beautiful picture of, to me, I just see it as Jesus, that and what he just invites us in, like you said, as we are. And I think about what you shared, Jacqui, about maybe your childhood and then what you experienced in marriage, that this invitation to just express what you're feeling in a very honest way, but also not stay there either. Like, I love how you said that God invited you to not hold on to the anger. Is that what you said?
Yeah, I guess I would say it as express the anger and sort of bring it up to God and other people as a way of moving towards the next step. The next step being like the follow-up conversation that's needed, or like emotionally healthy spirituality sort of talks about emotions as clues to what is happening in our internal world. So emotions are not meant to be worshiped. They're meant to be indicators for us to help us understand the pain that we're carrying, the unhealthy assumptions we're making, the things we're believing, that those are the things that need to be addressed and worked through.
So for both of you, how has Celebrate Recovery helped you in how you view yourself?
I love the verse in Isaiah that talks about like God longs to be gracious to us. And like, I almost have this image of him just, just so excited, right? To just extend that grace to us, and that's how he wants us to experience a relationship with ourselves and also with others. So whenever I'm really struggling to be gracious with myself, I pull that verse up because I'm like, God longs, like he craves it to extend grace here. I can ask him how to do that for myself and for others. I don't know if that, did that answer the question? Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think for me, I would say it helped me really feel God's posture towards me as something that is continuously loving.
Yeah, that's good.
Like thinking of it in terms of part of my therapy work, and this was kind of amplified by Celebrate Recovery, was sort of imagining like, how was God present with me when I was a 7-year-old and dealing with some of the emotional challenges I ran into there, and thinking about a loving parent, when their 7-year-old child screws up, they're steady, and they are helping them work through their mistakes with patience and grace, and God is the same way. So in the context of my marriage, in the context of other character defects that came out as I was in Celebrate Recovery, things like me overworking and giving too much of my thought life and energy to work, my attempts to control things that are not mine to control, and continuing to work through my codependency. In all of those areas, God is steadily rooting for my growth.
Wow.
And also just the format too is it's all about owning your stuff, right? So it puts the focus back on what can I control here and what can I control here? How do I release that if this is not something I can control, right? Like we can't control how someone views us, responds to something, but we do have a lot of control over how we respond to others and how we're talking to ourselves in those moments. So I think it also is a great format for kind of reevaluating your relationship with yourself, to be honest, which is, I think, so important and something I thought it was selfish to do, right? But yeah.
And that must have been incredibly healing for your marriage as well, as you both were learning these things.
It was, and continues to be.
Yeah, let's lean into that a little bit here. We've talked already a little bit how about the misconception of the incompatibility of therapy and faith, or the Christian faith. When you think about your own journey through therapy, while wrestling with faith and using that lens of the approach of an emotionally healthy spirituality approach and perspective on mental health and therapy, how would you say that was powerfully compatible? Not, in fact, incompatible, but powerfully compatible, and really part of your walk and relationship with God. And then to that point about really healing and being a blessing to your marriage, I'm curious for your marriage, but also your other relationships, really what you've seen God do as you've obediently walked through those seasons and different steps.
So I'll answer first in the context of marriage, and then I'll give one example outside of marriage. So I think it's the same lesson with different circumstances. So we have a beautiful, normal, almost 2-year-old daughter who had a phase that still a little bit where she was like pushing kids like it was her favorite thing in the world. Like, I wouldn't say playground bully, but like borderline.
And like out of nowhere.
Yeah.
You're like, wait.
Yeah. So
what is happening?
we had a lot of arguments about how to respond. And I wanted the approach to predominantly ignore it. and Jackie wanted to intervene more. And it was a place where like I felt a lot of resentment and control and a lot of unhealthy thoughts about like, oh my Lord, if he just freaking did it the way I want to do it, like we'd be good and we wouldn't have all these conflicts. But I was not operating out of a posture of how do I work lovingly as a team with my wife on this thing, and how do I release my resentment and honor the truth that like God is at work in both of us as we're trying to figure out how do we parent our daughter and respond to some of the different things that come up. So again, for me, it was a posture shift of owning my own unhealthy attitudes and trying to make a turn to work as a team with my wife. And then as far as outside of marriage, I think, yeah, actually work is a good area for me. So when I think about some of my work trajectory, a lot of the issues that I deal with now are the same ones I dealt with when I worked for the Christian college ministry. Like things like struggling with feeling overly responsible for students' decisions. Now I work with middle school students, and feeling like I need to control their decisions and different things like that. So part of my ongoing growth continues to be to let students make their own mistakes, to sort of walk patiently with them as they are learning things like how to relate, how to deal with conflict, how to express their emotions. Like I help out with the girls volleyball team at my school, and there's a girl who like in practice was really, really angry, but wouldn't talk to me because she was upset that I had told her she could play 2 games when it turned out she could only play 1 because I didn't calculate how many girls we had and trying to give everyone equal playing time. So she was really upset. I asked her like, we willing to talk, and she like just kind of gave me the silent treatment for a bit. So I think if I was in my like unhealthy state that I was with the college ministry, I would think it is 100% my responsibility to fix this kid here. And I need to take on all of her emotional stuff. So I gave the kid a few minutes to cool down. I invited her again, like, hey, I want to hear what you're frustrated with and own it non-defensively. And so a lot of how God has worked through me is as I continue to grow out of codependency towards emotional health. In that moment, I can sort of work through like, it's not my job to fix her. Mm-hmm. It's not my job to to own her feelings, but one thing I can do is be a safe, non-defensive, non-anxious presence that kind of lets her express herself and work through, help her work through towards a constructive solution.
Yeah.
That's so good.
I don't know if I have anything better to add. Yeah, I mean, I think I didn't realize I had this tendency until I started a step study with Celebrate Recovery of giving advice. Like I would offer, again, that I want to be perceived as someone who's helpful. I want to be perceived as someone who can anticipate your needs, who can... I'm an Enneagram 2, so I'm like, kind of like hide behind that identity sometimes, I think. And in Celebrate Recovery, you can't. You literally don't give advice. Like, you're there to support one another, not fix one another. That's literally one of the guidelines. And I was definitely a fixer. Like, if I saw someone that needed help, or at least I anticipated or assumed someone needed help, like I wanted to be the first one there. So I think for me, how that relates to just like relationships in general, and it's magnified more in marriage because you have more interactions and things like that. But that's not my role. that's not my role with fixing Paul, or, you know, assuming that he needs fixing in some way, or, you know, even calling out his character defects or anything like that. Like, it's about, I don't know. I'm losing my train of thought. Sometimes I just had a moment where usually I look to Paul to complete my sentences. It's one of my character defects.
I will try.
Okay.
So I think part of what you're saying is the temptation, and I think this is true in marriage, but many relationships, to think like, I need the other person to act differently. Like, I need them to change their attitude, their behavior, and then I'll feel okay. When so much of, I think, the spiritual growth that we've experienced is, nope, there are always ways that I am contributing to the problem here that I can take ownership of and make deliberate changes in if I want to see something healthy, if I want to move towards something healthy in whatever conflict is being experienced.
He did it.
There you go. You are one.
Only took 7 years of marriage.
You're right.
Well, one thing I love about your answers there is, and when you started, Paul, the sentiment of, there's both that, in that journey of therapy and growing in self-awareness, the recognition of your role to play, and that the shattering of the misconception that my spouse will fix me, will fill those gaps that, my personality has. But also simultaneously, as your view of God continued to grow and mature, the recognition that Jacqui also has been given so many gifts to bring to the table. So even though she won't fix all your gaps, simultaneously, with parenting decisions and figuring out how to parent well, or make life decisions together, recognizing that and honoring that unique giftedness, unique imago Dei she has as well. It's this juxtaposition of the both, and like, they're not here to fix me, but also there is something like deeply in them that God has, that God wants to use for me as well.
Which I would think, and I want you guys to answer this, not having that expectation that this other person, I have to fix them, would be freeing and surrendered to say, God, you do what only you can do. You help them, and I'm just going to be here to help as I can. I mean, did you guys find that freeing, or was it hard to not try to fix?
It's always hard.
Yeah, I think it's still hard, but also, yes, I would say there's definitely a freedom to just, I want to see Paul become the person that he wants to become. Like, it's an honor and a joy to be that close emotionally, physically, everything with somebody that I don't have with anybody else. I'm going to start crying. But it is. And it's, when we're in the day-to-day, especially with parenting and we're tired and I have not had easy pregnancies. I'm sick all the time. We actually rescheduled this podcast due to being sick last week. But yeah, oh my gosh, it blows my mind how much he fills in the gaps that I didn't have that before, right? Even the way that he's such a servant to our family with making meals and cleaning up after dinner. There's just so many things that feel just like such an honor to have a front row seat to, and to benefit from those things that he brings to the table that I struggle with.
I forgot the question. Can you say it one more time?
I think I asked that it was freeing.
Freeing.
That to not have to have the expectation to fix Jacqui.
Yeah. So my thought was yes, it is freeing. I still struggle with the temptation to want to fix. So it's not like that is gone, but I think the sort of speed in which I move in the direction of starting with personal ownership is faster, and then ultimately freeing, yes, because I think the result in my life of trying to fix Jacqui is nothing good. So for example, I think back to when Jacqui was in a really heavy season of depression, and she was also trying to get a new job. There were ways in which I talked to her about it and tried to help her towards job opportunities that were really like pushy and controlling. Like I was trying to fix her issues and her problems, and it did not inspire her to go for jobs or to, and really that was my own. The problem there was my own anxiety. I was anxious about money. I was anxious about the sort of the trajectory of our life together, and thinking some kind of like spiraling thoughts of like, will Jacqui be depressed forever, and will we sort of be stretched financially like in the long run. So and those are things where I was trying to control, and that brought no good fruit. I was often not a loving, patient, empathetic spouse in some of those times. So point being that the shift towards personal ownership changes those moments where I'm tempted to want to own her problem and have a healthier way to engage with her on it.
So with everything you guys shared, especially in relation to your marriage, and I just so relate with so many things in this, if you had to tell someone who's preparing for marriage or seeking marriage, and you had to paint a more accurate picture of marriage to them.
No, just kidding.
Yeah, it's a big question. What would you say to them?
The best gift that you can give your spouse is a continual willingness to grow. Like your willingness to own your own sin, own your own emotional issues, own your own contributions to problems. And that's, I think, one of the key ways to love your spouse. And that I think for us, that has been true. That has always been true in our marriage, and is part of the reason why we have a lot of joy and connection and are happily married. And I think that within that, I will also say, I think for us and for many people, the temptation and I've said this before, but to go back to thinking, if only my spouse would do blah, 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 I would not be so mad, or I wouldn't have all these problems, or I wouldn't feel so depressed, anxious, angry, stuck, whatever. It is always tempting to put the onus on them. And I think God's invitation is very frequently to start with our ownership and invite him into helping us work on our own stuff. I do want to make one quick qualifier, because I do know there are instances in which people are in an abusive situation or in a particular power dynamic in their marriage, where thinking I need to be the one to change is not always true. So I'm cautious to sort of state that advice as universal, because I don't think it applies equally in all marriage contexts, but I think in many, it is helpful.
Yeah. In a safe, healthy, loving, committed marriage, right? This applies. Okay. Love that, Paul. I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah.
I think for me, when I do struggle to place blame or respect or even love Paul, I will often visualize him as a little kid. And I know that sounds kind of weird, but especially now being a parent and seeing the world through Ezra's eyes, and even just seeing the kind of support she needs and the love she needs and that closeness physically and like emotionally, and to be present, like, and even like working through our own like childhood stuff, right? And what I needed and what I didn't get. Like, I will picture Paul as like little Paul. So if anyone's familiar with like inner child work, if you're not, like, that's totally okay. But it's basically your it gives you a softness to that person to really figure out like, okay, here is how little Paul might be feeling. What can like adult Jacqui do and say that would be loving to him right now? So that's something like I'm a very visual person. So that's just something that helps me to, when I'm in a place where I'm really resentful or angry or whatever with a situation with Paul, like I will often visualize little Paul and like, was that kind to say? No.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That gives you a real compassion for the other person when they're being maybe defensive or reacting in a normal human way. But when you picture them, that's cool. I like that a lot.
Yeah.
Would you both say, I feel like from your stories and from the story of your marriage, that approaching marriage, trying to approach marriage with the Christian lens, right, in a way kind of guided by the love of Christ. Would you say that approaching marriage that way has made it harder but more fruitful?
No. So I think marriage is hard whether you're a Christian or not. Like I don't, because I don't think approaching our marriage from a Christian lens has decreased the conflicts, because I think the type of conflicts we have, I anticipate, are the conflicts in any marriage, regardless of how you identify spiritually or to what spiritual community that you belong to. I definitely think it's made it more fruitful. So the no was the no was just about the question of, has it made it harder? Yeah. I think it has grounded us in our capacity to work through our personal pain and our conflicts. But I think we have likely similar conflicts to a lot of couples who are not Christian. And the presence of Jesus has been one of the components that continually helps us move towards love and forgiveness towards each other.
That's good.
Yeah, nothing else to add. That's good. Yeah.
All right. We're getting close to wrapping up here. This has been a rich conversation.
It really has.
One thing we want to ask just directly, kind of like head on here, is through all of this, and not only your marriage, but the stuff you've been through, why, just head on, like, why are you still following Jesus?
Answering this question, I feel choked up, because when I think about God's loving faithfulness to me, and when I think about being suicidal on the bridge, and how I felt almost convinced, like, life is too hard and painful, and I am too continuously disappointing to God, that I would like to stop living. When I think about that in light of God's continual loving presence in my life, like he gave me a spouse that has loved me well in dating and engagement and marriage. He's given me parents that have been an incredible gift to my recovery and healing. He's given me purposeful work that has transformed, or I should say, been a part of transforming how I see God and his love for me, and how he is using me in the world. And he's so good. So yeah, just coming to experience Jesus, I think, for who Jesus really is, which is the God that is rooting for me and loves me and is always inviting me towards a healthier, more fruitful life. I want that, and I continue to want it.
That's good.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Bring out the tissues.
Yeah. That's why I got them before.
Yeah, I think this question really it packed a punch for me as well. I thought of this verse in it's Psalm 27:18. I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. And I remember when I had read that in that season of depression, I kind of just went off of faith. I was like, okay, God, I might not see your goodness now. I don't know if I will see your goodness in this lifetime, but you're promising that I will see it at some point. And that is kind of what I had clung to and kind of declared over my life essentially in that time until I felt it again or whatever, but I've seen his goodness. I've seen his goodness in the way that, I found a community of believers that just felt so authentic. And I found it in when my dad passed away and 10 years later realized, oh, wow, I didn't even grieve this. And then had to grieve it and felt so odd about grieving his passing 10 years later. It came up in our engagement when I felt really alone. I felt like I couldn't process stuff even with Paul because he was going through such a hard time. And then when I felt alone, when I was going through that almost daily suicidal thoughts, so I have seen his goodness. I've seen myself go from being completely hopeless to feeling hopeful and grateful and excited about what God is doing in my life and what he promises, even when I don't feel it. Mm-hmm. So I always go back to that verse. It's always been kind of one of those things that has stood out to me of okay, I might not see his goodness right now, but he does promise I will see it. Mm-hmm. So yeah.
It's beautiful.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
Yeah. Thank you both so much. Is there anything that you guys haven't said yet that you'd like to before we wrap up?
Well, we'll give you a second to think about that. Let's wrap up here. Final thoughts from the whole group.
I'm saying that because
you were trying to get out of it.
No, because I'm processing everything that was just said. I mean, I just feel like it was so reflective of even things that I've been through.
Yeah.
That I think I walked into marriage with very high expectations of healing my relationship with my dad. And what's the struggle is that my husband can easily carry responsibility on his shoulders. So he carried mine, which was very hard for him. So to hear how you guys have sought help in so many healthy ways from such a difficult time is just so beautiful to hear. I'm so glad that the church responded that way. That people in your life responded that way, and the things that you're learning about God and have learned are just, I'm so glad that people are hearing this. I'm glad that I'm hearing this. So I really appreciate it. Yeah.
All right. In closing here, I think the thing that really stuck out to me, even early on in our conversation, I think actually it was just God's kind of clear presence and all the things y'all shared, and I wish we had more time to even dive in deeper to so many of the different parts, but you acknowledge this really difficult thing or this really difficult moment, and then seeing something beautiful come out of it. Beautiful for you, beautiful for your marriage, for your daughter, for your future son, for your family. And I think the poignant example that just sticks with me of that is Paul, your story, and just the poetic way you're able to tell it now of that moment of crisis on the bridge, really at your lowest. And then God bringing this person up to you, who then he brings back into your life in a different stage. Like, how do you look at that and not see God's hand behind it and his just presence all along the journey? And like that being your supervisor down the road, just kind of a little nudge, like just this beautiful nudge of, yep, I've been here. Just a reminder of what, the journey that's been and where I've been all along is. That's just one obvious example, but that has been evident throughout both of your stories.
Yeah.
So with that, you guys get the last word. Any final thoughts you want to share, either about your stories or just advice to our listeners, whatever it might be, things to throw in here?
Yeah. One thing that just came to my mind is thinking about, I'm excited to play this interview for my daughter someday, and just thinking about like God's presence in our family and how we can say to her, like, before you were born, God was at work in your parents. He was at work in some of the most challenging pain in our lives, and that's been one of the most formative things in our family is God's presence in that pain has changed so many things for our family, and I think offers us the chance to give a lot of gifts to her. So I'm grateful as I kind of imagine God doing that, and I also I'm very grateful for my wife, and I'm grateful to be married, and we have this repeated fight about when did I know I wanted to marry her. So I say it was during the first long conversation we had.
Wait, is this a fight?
Well, yeah, because you said you would often say like, no, it couldn't have been like the first time we like for reals talked.
Oh, yeah.
And I say, yes, it was the first time we for reals talked. So this was actually, it was a fundraising meeting for the previous, the Christian college ministry I worked for. I had to fundraise for this job. So I met with her asking if she would donate financially. And during that conversation, we talked for like 4 hours. And at the end of that conversation, I'm like, I actually called Amanda's husband, and I was like, I'm good. Like, this will be my wife, I hope. And
I don't know if I knew that.
yeah. And then she did become my wife. But no, and so we fight about like, did I actually know during that conversation?
Listen, Nick has the best memory of any human being I know. He would be able to tell you if this is true.
Call him out.
Yes.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's incredible for me to think about. God was there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think just really grateful. I'm super grateful for being able to chat with you too about our story, because we've never really sat down and told the whole gamut of it. But in addition, just especially like, we just celebrated 7 years this week. Ooh. And it feels like I've known Paul forever, but it also is like, wow, that's a long time. Like we've gone through a lot in those 7 years, especially those first couple of years. And, to have him by my side, navigating life and having really a partner and someone who's on your team, like, that's one of my favorite things that Paul used to tell me when we were just like going at it, like constantly, was like, I'm on your team. Like, and it just gave me it just put me at such ease of like, oh my gosh, I don't have to fight for this. Like, not fight, but I mean, prove myself, I guess. So yeah, just having him as a partner has been an incredible gift. Seeing him as a dad is like, oh my gosh, like, it's just the best. It really is the best. Especially to a little girl, and like even seeing those parts of my story heal, of like the relationship I had with my dad that I miss, and the things that like I never got to talk to him about, you know? So it's just, it's been a hard journey, but it's also been super rewarding, super fulfilling, and super hopeful. So I'm grateful for that.
That's wonderful.
Thanks so much, guys.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. If people wanted to reach out to you to ask questions or just say thanks or whatever the case may be, where could they find you?
They can send cash donations.
A gift of gratitude too.
Don't follow me on social media.
Okay, great.
Sounds good. Follow my wife.
Okay.
You can find me on Instagram. My handle's Stack the Jack.
Great.
Yeah, would be happy to just chat with you, answer questions, even if you have questions about how to get plugged in to a faith community where you feel supported, things like that. I live for that stuff. I love it. So I welcome any of those types of connections.
Yeah. Great.
Cool. In the show notes, we will add info about Celebrate Recovery, maybe EHS as well, Emotionally Healthy Spirituality.
For sure.
And if you're not on Instagram, but do want to get a hold of these guys, you can reach out. Can we use your email? I don't think we have one. Email.
Well, I mean, you can email Browncroft at any time, but my email is amanda@browncroft.org. And then we also have our own Instagram, so you guys can comment there and reach out. We want to hear from you. We care deeply about our listeners, and this is the reason why we have this podcast, because we want people to talk about things like this and more. So we're grateful that you guys listened today, and we hope to see you soon.